The first technique on this handout is masking tape. So what we're going to be doing is using tape, and it could really be any kind of tape, to create an edge on your paper that does not have the paint touch or show the white of the paper. So I'm going to get some tape here and just tape it down on the top. And I actually put this tape on my shirt and then lifted it up off of my shirt, so when I do go to peel this, it has some lint on it, so it's gonna make it a little bit easier to peel up. So I have my tape down, and then I'm going to go ahead and just grab any color on my paint or with my watercolor and paint it underneath. So this will create a nice edge on my paper. And this would be a great way to create a nice horizon line if you're maybe doing water with a sunset. So I'm gonna go ahead and add my blue here. Definitely make sure that you're waiting for this to dry, and then you can peel it up. So now that my paint is dry for the most part, I'm gonna go ahead and peel this up. And you can see that it leaves a nice edge on my paper. Like I said, this could be used for a sunset. So maybe then I would go in with a yellow or orange at the top, just to give you the idea of how this can be used. And it definitely helps if that is dry, so that your colors are not bleeding together. All right, the next technique that I want you to try is called dry brush. And this is a great technique to add texture into different areas. A good example of a texture that this could be used for is grass. So I'm gonna actually go ahead and create kind of a grass type of scene before we get started. So I'm gonna begin with a background, and then we'll do the dry brush on top of this. For the background, I'm gonna use just a really light green color and paint that back here. And then after I have this added, we'll go ahead with the dry brush technique on top to give more of that grass texture. So what I'm doing still is adding a good amount of water to this, just blending it out on my paper to have a nice background behind my dry brush. So give this a minute or two to dry, and then try to pick out a thicker brush or a thicker paintbrush if you have one to work with. Something like this would work great, so that you're able to add more of the texture into your practice. All right, so now that my background's mostly dry, I'm gonna go ahead and work with a darker color. So I'm gonna choose a dark green. And I did just put a little bit of water on my paintbrush, but I kind of soaked it off with a paper towel. I want just enough water where I'm able to get color on my paintbrush. So you can see as I'm doing this, I'm able to get some color on my paintbrush, but it's definitely dry and there is not much water at all. So I'm getting a good amount on here. And then I'm gonna take my brush and just use the texture of the brush to create the brush stroke. So as I'm doing this, it is not showing up too well right away, so that means I do need just a touch more water. So I'm gonna grab a little bit more water on here so that it will be visible on the camera, and then I'm gonna try that again. So now you can see that this is really showing up as the texture of the brush. And like I said, I'm trying to create kind of a grassy texture here. So you can see that light green in the background that I added, and then that dark green on top with the dry brush technique. Now the next one that we're gonna do is a technique called feather out. And this is a great technique that can be used on maybe flowers or plants or different objects that you're trying to blend or fade a color from the center towards the outside. So again, this could be a great technique for a flower petal. But I'm gonna start with a red in the middle. And I didn't add too much water to this. So you can see it has nice crisp edges. But now I'm just gonna take some water, so I'm not even gonna use any more color, just some water, and kind of feather those edges out a little bit. So I'm adding that water around the outside and using a circular motion to feather out the color. So that way I don't have that harsh edge anymore, but I'm starting to blend the color out. I know it is kind of tricky to see this value change as I'm working. I'm adding another layer on the outside, only because this is not the watercolor paper. We're just working with the regular paper here. So it's creating kind of that darker edge with the water because the paper is soaking it up. But I'm slowly adding more and more water to the outside here. as I go to fade that color into pretty much just the white background. So try to fade and blur that edge out or feather it out until there is nothing left. So like I said, this is tricky to see the effect, but hopefully if you're using the watercolor paper on your final project, you can see that color feathered out a little bit smoother. All right, this next one that we're gonna work with is blending, which is pretty much just blending gradients together. On your final project, there's going to be a lot of areas, looking at your reference picture, where you do need to have different colors blended together into each other. So I'm gonna start with the water in the background, and I'm gonna choose 2 or 3 colors where I can just fade and blend them together. So I'm gonna start with a dark green and add that on here. So choose 3 colors, and then I'm gonna go to a light green and add that next to it. And I didn't blend them together yet. I'm gonna wait till I have all 3 here, and then I'll blend those colors. And then I'm gonna end with yellow. Get a little bit more yellow on my brush to fill in the end. So now I'm gonna rinse off my brush, get some water on it, and blend those colors. So I'm just gonna paint right over top of them so that you're not able to see where one color starts and the other stops. So I'm bleeding and blending them into each other. So that's a color gradient where you have those colors blended nicely into each other. All right, this next one is called Hue, Tint, and Shade. This is where you're going to use the hue, which is just the natural regular color, and create a tint and shade of it. So a highlight and a shadow. This is important because when we're working with your final project, there are definitely gonna be areas that are light and areas that are darker, where you will need to mix black to create your shade or mix more water to create your tint. So I'm gonna start out and just pick a color. So I'm going to use purple. And I'm gonna grab purple and just put that down on my paper as the hue. So here is the main hue that we're working with. Next, I'm gonna create a tint of that. So what I'm gonna do for this is just add some water to that purple. So I'm gonna use a more watered down purple here. And this is the hue. So normally if you're working with acrylic or a different type of paint, you would mix white in order to get a lighter tint of your hue or lighter shade of the color that you're working with. But since we added more water to this, the white of the paper is showing through, and that's what's lightening our color. Then for this last part, I'm going to take some black and mix that with my purple and then add that here for the shade. So you can see the shade is much darker. However, if you feel like it's not dark enough, you can do a second layer when it dries, because there could be some of the white coming through, or you could mix a little bit more black directly on top of it. So I'm gonna have my hue as the regular color, the tint is my highlight, and the black mixed with my color is the shade. Now moving on, we're gonna do a paint drip with 2 colors. So for this technique, I'm gonna start with a nice watered down background, and then I'm gonna choose a color for my background. So I'm gonna start out and just paint the water in the background. And this is a technique where you will wanna use a good amount of water and work quickly so that it does not dry. But I'm gonna do just a nice light yellow color in the background here. Then I'm gonna get a good amount of water on my brush and choose a color. So I'm gonna do red, and I'm gonna make sure that I get plenty of water and plenty of color on my brush. So I'm gonna go in for another layer of water. And then I'm just going to drip this color into my background. So this is going to bleed into that background since it's wet, and create just an interesting texture, kind of like an ink drip or an ink drop. And this could be used in many different ways, many areas. This could be done for clouds, flowers. You can use it on maybe rocks to create a speckled rock background. But I'm gonna do 2 colors here, so I'm grabbing a purple as well. And I'm just gonna drop that right into the red color that I used. So I'll try that one more time just to see what it looks like with maybe some different colors before moving on. I'm gonna grab some green, dark green as my next color, and then just drop it into my background. So I do need more water for that one to work. So I'm gonna drop a little bit more water into it. And it's just going to take a minute, but it's gonna soak and bleed and mix with my other color. And I can even go back in with the yellow and try to kind of bring some more of that color out and bleed that in with the background. These last 2 sections are color matching and value matching. Color and value are very important to match as we're working with your final projects so that you're able to layer things and create that value to show more dimension in your project and create those realistic colors and values throughout. So we're gonna start with this top one here, which is a darker blue color. And I'm gonna work with light layers. With watercolor, it's always important to build your layers because you cannot undo or really go back to what you had before with this. So I'm gonna start with a watered down background to create a light layer. And then since this is blue, I'm gonna try to match my lightest blue color, which does look a little bit darker on the camera here. But this is a lighter blue, so I'm gonna grab that and add that into the background. Now looking at the blue that I have, it does appear a little bit brighter. So I'm gonna bring in just a touch of green and just mix that right on my paper. So I'm gonna mix that green with the blue that I had. And that is my background. So this is my main hue. Looking at this image on the left here, it does fade from a lighter value on the left into a darker value. And you can kind of see some specific areas of shadow on top. So as you're working, you could either let those layers dry if you want more detailed areas or detailed edges, or if you wanted to work with more like the wet on wet technique, you can leave it wet and just keep layering your colors and values. Since this is darker on the right, that would be more of my shade. So I do need to bring in a little bit of black. So here's just a touch of black that I brought in, and it is a little bit much. So I'm gonna rinse off my brush and just try to fade that from the right here towards the left where it is darker. So I'm following the values the best that I can with this. So now I have my darker blue on the right. I'm gonna keep bringing in just a little bit more black, trying to follow the areas where it is the darkest. So there's kind of this streak on the top. There's a section in the middle that comes out that's darker, and then along the bottom. So trying to follow the value change with this. And at the same time, trying to keep my lightest section as light as I can so that I can go back and layer it if I need to, but I am unable to take away that lighter value. All right, so now that I have that darker section filled in, I can decide if I want to bring maybe some more blue on top. So I'm going to grab some water and just bring in a little bit of blue on top here, mix that in to some other areas, trying to make sure that I am matching the colors the best that I can. So I'm even bringing in just a little bit of purple, layering the black on top to darken it. So the more layers you can work in, the better and more accurate your final project will turn out. So always take your time and try to color match the best that you can. So that's that first section. Moving on to the bottom one, this is more of an orangish red color. So if I started out with just the regular orange straight off of the palette, it's not going to completely match what I want. So I'm gonna start there though. I'm gonna start with my orange and just add that to the bottom. So the orange right off of my paint palette is much brighter than the orange that we're working with over here. So I need to try to match my colors to create this orange. So another color that I could bring into it is more of a red. And I don't want to do too much red. I want that red to kind of mix with my orange so that I have more of an in-between color. So this is a little bit much for the red. So I can dilute it a little bit by pulling it down with my brush and trying to blend more water into it to lighten that. And then I can go back over it with my orange. So I'm gonna bring my orange back. And now I'm getting very close to matching that color. It is a lot more saturated or bright on the left side. So I'm gonna bring even a little bit of yellow into that color on the left, maybe add a little bit more red to it. And then just a touch of black on the right in order to make that not as saturated, so desaturate my color, and blend that out to match the value along with the hue.